Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talking Logistics, where we have conversations with thought leaders and newsmakers in the supply chain logistics industry. It's my great pleasure to welcome today's program, David Cahn, who's Director of Product Marketing at Elemica. And today we're going to talk about navigating the risks in supply chain management. Now, if you were to add a subtitle to, the supply chain professional's job description, it would be, risk manager or risk mitigator. Because the reality is that supply chain management is not just about managing orders and transportation and inventory. It's all that while also navigating through the myriad of risks that face industries today. So what are some of these growing risks? What are some of the challenges to address them and overcome them? And how can technology help? Well, those are some of the questions we're going to explore and discuss today. With David, and it's great to have him on the program to kind of share his perspective as he, works with clients and where supply chain risk management is kind of a top concern for them. So, David, welcome to the program.
Oh, thanks, Adrian. Thanks for having me aboard. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We've had some of your colleagues there at Elemica on the program before, but this is the first time, for you. So like I always like to do when we bring on a new guest is I always am curious in terms of how they got involved with supply chain and logistics to begin with. So kind of before we dive into the topic, why don't you, briefly tell us a little bit about, your career path, how and why you got involved with supply chain logistics and what your current role and responsibilities are there at Elemica.
Sure. Well, I wanted to be an astronaut, actually, or actually sail around the world. And somehow I ended up in supply chain. So, all kidding aside, I started out as a production engineer, putting in early stage ERP, MRP systems back in the day and robotics and CAD/CAM solutions for North American Phillips. And eventually that kind of evolved into kind of moving into supply chain solutions, mainly around enterprise integration, transportation management systems, and WMS or warehouse management over the years. And then I lived the world of customer-facing solutions and customer experience for the past few years, which was very exciting. I also, kind of ironically, had a stint with the large consulting firms, heading up some of their supply chain and some of their ERP practices. I also worked as an industry analyst for a while at AMR, which is now part of Gartner. And finally, as we all wish we kept did, I started and built and sold my own e-commerce and supply chain software company during the .com days. So now I'm basically living the dream at Elemica. Today I'm head of product marketing at Elemica, which is the business network for the process industry.
Great. Well, there's some parallels between your path and mine. I actually also wanted to be an astronaut when I was a kid. In fact, when I used to walk to elementary school, I used to pretend that I was in an astronaut suit as I bounced along, on my way to school. And, I also got my career in production. I started in manufacturing at Motorola. So I had, spent some years there. And obviously, I didn't start a .com company, but, I am an entrepreneur myself with, obviously with Talking Logistics and Adelante. So it's amazing how, these things ultimately bring us to, supply chain management one way or another.
Yep. Yeah.
So anyway, when neither of us got to the moon, but here we are today, on the front lines of supply chain logistics. And, like I said in my opening, comments, supply chain management is almost synonymous with risk management. And it seems like the number of risks that supply chain professionals have to face every day is just growing. I mean, what do you see as the biggest supply chain, risk that companies face today?
So from a risk perspective, supplier viability is one of the major concerns of supply chain leaders these days and procurement professionals. So, and basically it comes down to, are they willing and can they commit their direct materials to specific trading partners? There's a multitude of surveys out there in the market. You and I have read them and even organized them that highlight supply of financial viability and even some of the related operational viability due to things like bankruptcy, declining balance sheet health, or even the ability to meet their obligations in a timely manner are pretty much things that are pretty much top of mind. And then you kind of think of other aspects beyond just the delivery aspects of the supplier quality and the performance risk related or unrelated to supplier financial viability. And some of these can change overnight, like the brand image of something or the reputation of a risk based on a supplier contract or related compliance activities, like some bad ingredient or some aspect of loss traceability. So another one, I guess, would be kind of on-time delivery risk. Will they be around to support my delivery schedules, and can I trust them, basically not to shut down my plant? And do we have the right metrics in place with these trading partners around service level agreements? Is the mode of transport that they're using, is it the most efficient to impact my on-time delivery? And then really at what cost to them and what cost to me, is it a win-win? So kind of Elemica enables the supply chain within the chemical and process industries. We orchestrate the material movement between buyers and sellers and logistics providers in a very regulated industry that's kind of moving at times probably the most hazardous chemicals and materials in the world. And so therefore, there's a tremendous amount of risk and correct material labeling and handling of that risk, and that's assumed by the shipper and the logistics provider. So there was a conference a couple of weeks ago called Logichem, which is kind of a logistics for the chemical industry, obviously. It was about 2 weeks ago, and there was a discussion around the logistics providers and the risk that they need to take on when they sign on a new customer. And so some of those were really around the correct labeling of materials into the containers that they were going to be responsible for. And whether it was rail or road or ocean, those things came to be highlighted. And one of the logistics providers' major risk on taking on these trading partners and moving their goods. And do they have the correct signage? Was the material certified? Was it labeled correctly for material handling concerns? Was the material loaded into the containers to minimize product damage? During transport, if the truck fell over or there was a rail derailment on the rail, was it satisfactorily loaded correctly? And were the containers that the materials were kind of stored in, were they properly maintained and certified? So it's not just the material; it's even the loading containers that the material is being stored, are they labeled and maintained correctly? So these are some of the major risks that were identified even at the conference.
Yeah, no, those are all great points. In fact, building on that point, earlier this year, I wrote a post, highlighting, a hazardous materials labeling and how it's so much more than just, paperwork or, placards on a truck or a container or some other, vehicle. There really is a lot of processes and a lot of, ultimately risk involved in that whole process. And unfortunately, a lot of companies, particularly some of the smaller companies, just aren't prepared or are addressing those risks, effectively. Yeah. And, you talked about on time, and the risk associated with on-time delivery or not getting deliveries on time, shutting down a plant, or, we see that in retail right now with, Walmart and Target, Walmart's case with on time in full, right? And kind of the penalties that they're imposing on suppliers if they don't get the deliveries within that very much more narrower time window today. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think those risks are just becoming, more and more greater. I mean, one of the other things I've seen, this past year, we certainly saw cyber threats and cyber attacks, having a bigger impact on supply chains with companies like FedEx and Maersk kind of, being affected there. I mean, is that something that you're seeing supply chain professionals pay more attention to, or some other kind of broader risks?
Yeah, so we do see that, since we're running a network. So cyber threats are important to the data security aspects of the supply chain. So data security, privacy, sovereignty of the data is a challenge because different supply chain participants actually may have different protocols for controlling that data across the network and across their access and visibility with trading partners. So at Elemica, for example, we operate in a really highly regulated industry, as we mentioned before, with customers shipping potentially very hazardous products. So we hold our customers and their suppliers' data privacy as a really top concern. So with sensitive data such as customer information related to trading volumes, product launches, material handling requirements, pricing, delivery schedules, certificates of analysis, the continuous change in security requirements and threats should not really be forgotten. So our data is encrypted and it's secure with a rigorous kind of key-based system for access to that data. And so our core infrastructure is cloud-based and supports the global needs of not only North America and the European community to kind of ensure compliance in this multi-global transportation supply chain security expectations. So besides that, however, there are risk takes on many forms in the supply chain. We talked about the on-time delivery, we talked about cybersecurity, but there's also supplier and weather and geopolitical and others. So many kind of multi-enterprise platforms like Elemica are starting to embed risk-related information from content services to provide a more holistic risk information and mitigation of those risks to the shippers and to the customers. So combining this with like real-time information about weather patterns or weather events, they can be linked to suppliers and orders can be redirected, or shipments can be expedited or orchestrated in a different manner. So it gives them visibility into how they can react to supply chain disruptions of whether it be economic, whether it be environmental, whether it be weather patterns, all different other types of risk as well. So you're seeing us and others kind of embed other third-party kind of information into our networks to help mitigate those risks.
Yeah, no, I see that as well. And, I want to get to that. I think I want to explore that a little bit further in the conversation, particularly as it relates to, technology and the role of, visibility and all that, because I think that's where I'm seeing a lot of that data being fed into or being combined with, visibility solutions to provide that, that greater insight. But before we get to kind of the technology piece, I mean, when you, talk to your clients about supply chain risk management today, I mean, what are some of the biggest constraints or hurdles that they face today?
So I think one of the major constraints that we see in terms of the onboarding process or the digitization process is actually, I'd have to say, is the data quality that they have or they're trying to bring to the network and share with other trading partners. So it includes the complete aspect of data quality, whether it's reliability or fidelity or timeliness and cleansing of that data, and then obviously the correlation of sequencing of those transaction sets. So, and due to the many different operational differences among organizations, the data is often available from disparate formats and different systems and different arrangements. So it's not presented, or it's not even presented there at all. So the correlation becomes really, really key on how do we sequence that and tell you where your materials are, where your risks are. So besides the aspect of inaccurate data, it also includes a facet of delayed data, as well as the overall operating speed of the data exchange among the network. So you can't really forget the importance of data mapping along the documents and the processes and the partners, establishing, in essence, a relationship model as a supply chain network foundation. So at Elemica, our unique ability to take data globally from multiple partners and then enrich it based on business rules solves the data quality problem in a lot of aspects that plague so many other supply chain visibility initiatives. So the partners are responsible for the data that they contribute to the process, and they can receive alerts and reports or trigger data, aspects that drive upstream or downstream processes. So the business network then ensures that their data is available to them, it's complete, it's usable, timely, and it's accurate.
Yeah, it never fails to amaze me. I mean, there's so much buzz and discussion today around obviously visibility, machine learning, business intelligence, analytics, but it really all boils down to, I mean, the fundamental foundation to all that is, still data quality, right? And having it timely, accurate, complete. You still have to deal with the reality, as you talked about, that, that this data is coming from many different systems, many different trading partners. And, I hear the same thing, for the past 18 years that I've been an industry analyst, it's wrestling with that data acquisition, data cleanliness, data accuracy and timeliness that continues to be a challenge. But I think on the technology side, I think you talked about some of the things you're doing. I know others are doing other things from a technology standpoint, to help address that data quality issue. And we're seeing things now kind of moving away from EDI, or at least not relying solely on EDI as an example, and kind of moving more toward APIs as a mechanism to get more timely and accurate data via that vehicle. Are you seeing the same thing, kind of moving away from EDI, or at least not relying so much on EDI, but moving forward, companies embracing APIs as kind of an integration mechanism or a way to share data more in a more timely manner?
Yeah, so we're seeing that, there's kind of different ways that partnerships can be onboarded, onto a network. They don't necessarily have to all be through kind of an EDI, kind of an integration. That could be somewhat pretty cost prohibitive to certain partnerships, depending on the volume. So we see customers are now within our base going through sort of a segmentation analysis. For the 80/20 rule, we will use standard-based APIs to connect their ERP to to the network, so to transfer data back and forth. And then, for those partnerships that you don't necessarily have as extensive a relationship with, there's a more cost-effective methods. There's a portal technologies, there's email technologies that are more cost-effective to bring on those partnerships into the network and still achieve, the visibility requirements that the ecosystem, is providing. So,
yeah, no, I see the same things. Is really kind of taking a faceted approach to onboarding trading partners and the way information and data is exchanged with all parties. Which kind of brings us now into the technology, part of the discussion, and the role that technology plays here, specifically with everything happening, like I mentioned, with like machine learning and artificial intelligence and visibility and analytics. Everything that certainly is making the headlines, these days from a supply chain technology standpoint. I mean, how are these technologies, helping companies to better manage supply chain risks?
So I think overall that these critical network platforms like Elemica for the process industry, they're acting in support of supply chain visibility and decision processing. And so these systems are rapidly starting to sense changing market and partner conditions, and they're starting to anticipate response to demand and supply chain events, kind of via alerts up and down the stream. And they're using advanced analytics or machine learning for automated decision support. So we see within our customers probably the full spectrum of supply chain execution and cross-industry enterprise process for both, for transportation management, rating services, global trade, and risk management using our business network solution. So when it comes to kind of advanced analytics and machine learning, these have been around, you and I, these have been around for, some time now. And, and only now we have access to great computer power and applications, enabling us to take advantage of these, which we've said for the last 15 years, So the computing power, 10 years ago was, we now have new computing power. But these technologies have been around for a long time. And now they're really starting to be really deployed finally, specifically for the chemical supply chain. And as networks bring formerly disparate sets of supply chain data together, which has been easily based on some of the new standards and XML kind of standard-based technologies to bring this stuff together. So we have new opportunities now to kind of apply machine learning are starting to emerge. And an example would be the combination of global trade management with transportation management and real-time tracking. This is also starting to drive a tremendous amount of data into the network and into the correlation and into the risk mitigation process. So these more sophisticated analytic programs need to take advantage of that for end-to-end logistics. So machine learning can now analyze the data and provide kind of a reality check into estimated arrival times, risk, and performance that really wasn't feasible in the standalone systems. I see kind of the next step forward is kind of multi-mode visibility to get a truly end-to-end view of logistics across ocean, rail, and truck. Many companies built their own, control towers, so to speak, that stitched together a variety of systems, which we were not tied to training partners in any true, real integration fashion. But now the network provides options so companies don't have to build everything by themselves. They can choose a platform provider like Elemica, and that directly provides the necessary visibility and the content services that they're looking for. So I guess for me, the bottom line here is that the end-to-end visibility that's created by the network doesn't just answer the question, where's my stuff anymore? You can also provide, it also can provide the foundation for supply chain financing, for example. Banks can actually now subscribe to the same systems as the shippers, and they can use the logistics information to release payments and extend credit. So the participants in the ecosystem just keeps growing and growing over time, and with more and more data being correlated.
Yeah, I've been a big proponent of what I've always called kind of supply chain operating networks or network effects, right? And I think some of the things you talked about is the kind of the possibilities that now exist, from a network effects standpoint when you have multiple trading partners on on a platform. I think to your point, a lot of things that we're seeing today is not necessarily new, but I think the availability now of cloud computing and the fact that companies have, almost infinite computing power to tackle some of these, more complex supply chain optimization, or being able to analyze, substantially more data in a much more realistic operational time frame than they used to be able in the past. In the past, they might have been able to do it, but it might have taken, 24 hours, 36 hours for the computer to crank through all the data or the analysis, right? Which now, when you tap into a network, and you tap into kind of a cloud computing infrastructure, things that used to take hours can take literally minutes or seconds today. So I think that's been a big game changer. And certainly I think there's more to come in this area. So I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, David, if I'm talking to the CEO or CFO of my company, and I mean, how do I communicate the value of these solutions, to them? In other words, what's the business case?
So, we find ourselves, with that challenge, actually. So from the CEO's perspective, there's a few prime value propositions to discuss that impact their balance sheet and income statements, and they understand those correlations, those documents very well. So depending if the company's strategy moving forward is whether it's a growth strategy or whether it's kind of cost containment, depending on the economy, or whether they want to strive for innovation, or even a combination of two or all three, are all kind of relevant when it comes to these supply chain networks. And by digitizing the enterprise processes, the organization is saving monies by automating the manual processes and order and invoice and shipment error corrections, and achieving some level of reduced reconciliation processes. And at the same time, they're optimizing the working capital that they need to continue to drive the business. And from a growth perspective, though, providing an easier way to do business through integration of the customer ordering process and trusting suppliers with customer delivery schedules, it ensures customer fulfillment, their needs, and improves customer services are met. So this, that kind of translates into larger and more customer orders, optimized inventory. If I'm doing vendor managed inventory, I can optimize my inventory for one customer, but I also can now start to use that excess inventory to serve other customers that I wasn't able to take advantage of in the past. Well, I can serve more. I can optimize my inventory to serve more customers and basically improve overall my cash to cash cycles. And then I guess from an innovation perspective, integrating through a business network supports a lot of co-development, especially we see in the specialty chemicals arena, for example, and other innovative products in a kind of a more streamlined manner, so that these products can be delivered to market in a more timely manner and delivering a competitive advantage, all at a higher margin.
Yeah, no, I think those are great things, and I like the fact that you not only brought up the cost side of the equation, which obviously the CEOs and CFOs always keep an eye on, and the fact that, which is something I always tell supply chain executives, you really need to equate whatever you're going to be doing in supply chain management with the P&L and the balance sheet, because that's the language they speak, right? So you have to be able to equate that. But I like the fact that you also, brought out, linking this with a growth strategy, right? That it's not just about cost reduction or cost management. I mean, that's important, but I think, tying it in with growth, because every time I talk to, senior executives, or when I listen to, financial calls, just about every CEO, CFO out there, is looking for how to drive profitable growth, right? So it is a growth thing. And certainly if you're a public company, that's what a lot of the Wall Street investors like to look for is growth. And then the innovation piece, I think that's a hot topic in supply chain overall, and being able to leverage, technology and leverage a platform and a network ecosystem to drive innovation, I think is another, interesting value proposition that, ought to be explored as well. David, we're running short on time here, so I just have a couple of, more questions. I mean, how do you see the state of supply chain risk management, evolving over the next few years? What's going to change?
So I see a couple of things. So I see that we need to make the supply chain an engine for growth, as we talked about. Many supply chain leaders don't understand how their work can drive growth, as you mentioned, or become customer focused. Instead, many organizations are still stuck in that cost-focused paradigm, I'll say. As I've had a conference recently where the takeaway from a roundtable was that our supply chains would operate so smoothly if we didn't have customers, disrupting the process all the time. It was kind of, shows obviously there's room for improvement in attitude, I guess. So, but these days there's a lot of noise, I guess, in the market around things such as like Internet of Things and network of networks and blockchain and digitization and AI and machine learning and finally predictive and prescriptive analytics. And the problem is that these great technologies, well, some may be new and some, they're simply just rewording of what we've been talking about for the last, 10 years, have not really been utilized to drive growth and, or adding value to end customers. We've been using them as kind of self-serving or very inward focused. So when we gather this information from like Internet of Things and about how our products are being used, we can then drive innovation and co-development in the business network among those trading partners, and we can gain competitive advantage and higher profit margins. When we start using AI and machine learning to not only predict shipment behavior and to include but to also include customer behaviors around our products, we're then providing value. When we start to include external factors like weather conditions, traffic patterns, currency, and environmental implications to the network, how that affects the chemical industry, makes and delivers and produces their products across the wide variety of our everyday lives, we're adding value in a very streamlined and efficient manner. So I think these are things that Elemica is enabling through our chemical industry business network. The value of an ecosystem of trading partners collaborating across the entire value chain, can be just tremendous.
Yeah, I know. There's certainly, I mean, one of the things I love about this industry is that there's never a dull moment. And I think anytime you look forward or you look ahead into the future, even though there's challenges and risks, as we've been talking about, there's also tremendous opportunity and a lot of exciting things on the horizon, many of which you just touched upon there. So certainly, enough to kind of fill up, a year's worth of discussions for sure. But we're kind of out of time here, so I'm just going to go right to my last question. I mean, as a way to wrap up, I mean, what questions should supply chain executives and logistics executives ask themselves to assess whether they have the right systems and the processes in place to manage risks or even mitigate or prevent them altogether, moving forward in their supply chain?
So I think first and foremost, these individuals need to understand that the risk and processes that they need to have visibility and some control over are basically all external to their organization. They're outside the four walls of their facilities. So first understanding what is their primary risk that they want to mitigate. Is it a product supply issue? Is it a customer delivery issue? Is it a handling issue? Is it the return processes of empty regulated containers that's the issue? Is it weather? Is it sources of supply? I think once they understand the priority of what they want to have visibility in, some level of control over? Do they have the trading partners impacted, tied to, and the necessary information tied to the network like Elemica in the chemical industry for that visibility and for that exception-based processing? You know, is there that collaborative framework in place to resolve issues in a more prescriptive manner? So I guess in the end, you know, the chemical industry, you know, delivers products across every aspect of our lives, you know, from the sports we participate in, to the foods we eat, to the music and arts we listen to and admire, you know, the clothes we wear and the toys our children play with, you know, at this time of year. You know, Elemica is basically the enabler and orchestrator for them, and to get their products to that market faster and more efficiently. You know, that's kind of what we're enabling in the supply chain here.
Yeah, I mean, so it really comes down to, you know, understanding or analyzing what the potential risks are and kind of prioritizing them. And then obviously having the visibility, you know, and the information, the data that you need to convert that into information to take, you know, more proactive action, you know, to mitigate or even prevent, you know, disruptions, you know, from occurring. And then obviously, you know, one company can't do it alone. Ultimately, this is a collaborative, you know, effort that needs, you know, your trading partners need to be part of the process there. And obviously being part of a business network helps to enable that. So David, you know, great having you on the program. Like I always say, you know, at the end of all our conversations is that, you know, we always just manage to scratch the surface on these topics, but I think you provided some great insights and advice on as it relates to supply chain risk management. So thank you for making the time.
Oh, thanks, Adrian. Thanks again for the opportunity once again. Have a great day.
Great. And I want to thank those of you that joined us. If you are watching this episode on demand at the Elemica website or on the Talking Logistics website, and you've got a question or a comment for David, you can post it there, and I'm sure that he'll be more than happy to respond via that medium. Again, thank you all for joining us, and look forward to seeing you in a future episode of Talking Logistics. Have a great day.